Let's get sweaty.
Hey guys, and welcome to a Shenmue Dojo video. Today's video I wanted to talk a little bit about Shenmue and the possible lessons that SEGA would have learned from it and sort of the impact around that. So I'm looking at this from not just a financial standpoint. Obviously you know the whole issues with the finances around Shenmue and the budget and everything else around it. But what I'm asking is actually, is that investment paid off much later on down the road for SEGA in terms of the productivity and the things they are putting out now? And had Shenmue not happened when that happened, would they even have the benefit of some of these things they are doing now, such as Like a Dragon and the processes there and their other games and the money they're making from that? So that's what I'm trying to put into context, not just the financial side of things, but the other things they have learned through the process, and then talk about how that's had potentially a positive impact on SEGA. Now, just to caveat things a little bit, I am coming at this from a person who doesn't work in the games industry. I've never been a developer, so I could be talking complete nonsense, but this is just like an idea in my head that I wanted to get out there and at least ask the question and pose the question. So this video was inspired by an article on phantomriverstone.com, which was a three-parter looking at Shenmue 3 in development from that, and then it's dived in a little bit to talking about the scope of the original Shenmue games and Shenmue 1, and the particular comment that sort of stood out for me here, that they were talking about Shenmue's development was carried out simultaneously on several sections, working on the series as a whole rather than one game at a time. And that sort of got my, I guess, juices flowing in time, sort of thinking this through and thinking, well, okay then, so was that a procedure at SEGA back then? Was it something they did normally? Or was that something that they looked at and go, actually, that was a really good idea, let's do that for future games, future content, and all the rest of it. I also want to touch on some of the focus development stuff, the budget management, and then some final thoughts on things as well. So let's dive in and talk about focus development. Now, as we all know, Shenmue's development spanned 2 consoles, 3 if you want to include the souped up Saturn, the boosted Saturn. So it's quite difficult with focus when you're going to be moving from console to console to console. That is going to generate issues in itself. It's going to generate issues in terms of workflow, getting things over to the new platform, and all the rest of it. So I can understand to a point there that there's going to be a lack of focus in development because you've moved from console to console to console. So that means you start again, you start again, you start again. Yes, you can use some of the previous assets and stuff, but essentially you've got to rework everything to make it work on the new platform. But there are some criticisms here as well. Towards the end of development of Shenmue, it was well known that Nagoshi came in to essentially get the game out the door because things had spiraled out of control in terms of the ideas that were being put in. The game was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you look at the beta shots, for example, how much unused content is there out there? So again, it's one of those things that you look at and go, why did it spiral out of control so much? Was this essentially a team just chucking everything at this project and ideas and ideas and ideas mounted? Or was this a wider symptomatic issue in terms of the fact that because this was like the first time a game like this was being developed, they didn't have the benefits of like proper design documents that I think you get now, the structures around development that are in place now. Certainly in Western studios, it's a lot more structured, it's a lot more rigid. You'll have workflows, you'll have timelines, you'll have deadlines and everything else as well. Whereas I think Shenmue was almost like a feeling the way through things with a massive team, one of the largest teams that's ever worked at SEGA on a game at that point in time. And they had to work out how the hell this was all going to come together. So there is difficulty there with focus, but at the same time you have to look at it from a project management standpoint and go, was there also a lack of focus because of the way things were managed? They were feeling their way through things, but then you have to bring somebody in like Nagoshi to get the game out the door, which suggests that actually in some aspects they sort of got carried away with things and needed reining back to get this game out and made, and that obviously has an impact on budget as well. So going forward, have SEGA gone, right, so we're going to have this game made, we need it managed in a certain way with a certain level of focus, with deadlines, with timelines, with proper design documentation, and proper accountability for things either hitting deadlines, not hitting deadlines, and everything else going forward. So there's that element to it. Now, another element to this, and something that I picked up in the interview I showed on the screen earlier, is that the team were working on several games at a time. So we know that Shenmue 1 and 2 were developed essentially in parallel. When you go back to a lot of the footage from the magazines back in the day, there was a lot of Shenmue 2 stuff in there, a lot of old stuff that never made it as well. There wasn't so much from Shenmue 1 because essentially that was going to be one game, and then it expanded essentially into 2 games. But also, when you look at it over time, you can see the assets that were made by the team. We've come to learn that Shenmue had many assets across the entire series made. I mean, you look at the Cliff Temple renders from the artworks we've released. You look at the models of Elder Ye and Yang Lang, which look like from the Dreamcast era, sort of 97, 98 type as well. And there's also stuff that wasn't used, like the Karate Tournament. So they were clearly developing across many games within this big project, which is fantastic. Now, it's been noted in interviews since that RGG Studios essentially model that way going forward. So they will have several teams within that whole development studio working on several games at a time. So you might have one person doing, I say one person, a few people doing mini games, for example, but they will work on the mini games not just on one title, but they might work on 2 or 3 titles at the same time. So that then encourages efficiencies as well. So by having those teams working on several games at the same time, you can reuse some of the assets, you get some efficiencies out of it, and it just means, I think, you get that more focused development in there that I think Shenmue may have lacked in some areas. But it did a good thing here in that they were working across many games of the series at the same time, hence all the assets that we've seen. So the other thing, though, and I do say this around sort of asset reuse with Shenmue and learning from that bit of it within the whole several games at a time thing, is Shenmue can do that to a point. It could have reused the assets and does in Shenmue 2 for the fighting engine, for example. That's all reused. The character models are reused or touched up in some aspects, but you can't do that to the level you do it in a Yakuza Like a Dragon game, because in Shenmue you're going from location to location to location, whereas Like a Dragon, generally speaking, they've been in Kamurocho for ages, or they've reused other areas within it as well. And you think of Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, and then obviously Like a Dragon Pirate, that is set in Hawaii. So again, they've reused that whole area to make the game. So you're cutting out a lot of the legwork there. And that hits then budget management. Now, it's probably a good way in. Budget is one of the is a major factor at the end of the day. You need to be coming in on budget with your games these days, because you're answering to all sorts of stakeholders, shareholders, and everywhere else in between. And it can be the difference between you making money, not making money, and getting shut down in theory. When you look at the games industry at the moment, a lot of studios are being shut down because they either aren't making enough money, things aren't happening, and that people are cutting their losses, obviously post-COVID 5 years on. We know Shenmue cost anything between $47 million and $70 million to develop, including some of Shenmue 2. The $70 million figure is alleged to include marketing as well. I don't know, I've never had that confirmed, but those figures are brandished about quite a lot. And as we know, there was a lot of asset development beyond Shenmue 2. But either way, the budget kept going up and up and up, and there was little control over how this happened, where things needed to end and needed to be wrapped up. Now, while it goes without saying, Sega had to learn to manage these big projects better and much better, and by and large have done. Although you can look at Hyenas, the Secure Wars mobile game, Shenmue Online as 3 examples where they've just turned around, done big scale projects and gone chucked them out the window, not doing anything with them, and wasted a ton of money. Hyenas was in excess of Shenmue's budget, for example, is the numbers being flagged around. Shenmue Online was about $20 million wasted. I think Secure Wars Mobile was a very similar thing, $20 million wasted. So they still make some very odd decisions in some aspects, but they seem now to be much stricter on ensuring games stick to budget. They're also a bit more risk adverse with some of the games they put together. So when you look at your Sonics, you look at your Like a Dragon titles, you know what you're getting pretty much. You're getting improvements, absolutely, but they are looking at the balance sheets. They're going, right, how do we manage the budget for these games better? Shenmue didn't have that benefit of it because they're doing a lot of things for the first time, so you don't know what these are going to cost. And likewise, I don't think they knew how to manage a project on that scale because it's the first time they've done it. So there's going to be a learning curve to it, which I think now is being applied to their projects going forward. So again, that initial investment, and a lot of the team RGG worked in AM2, have worked on Shenmue, they've got experience around that. And people at Sega and the upper management worked on Shenmue and have the experience of that. So all that investment there, while obviously from a financial standpoint, when the game came out, didn't make its money back, Has it made its money back now? That's the question I'm going to come on to at the end of this. But then you look at the longer term investment and go, well, actually, we've had a really good return on this. So does it then look at Shenmue in a different light potentially? And the last thing I'm going to talk about here before I come on to my final thought is the template for future games such as Yakuza. So obviously Shenmue was groundbreaking. It was an open world. You could talk to everybody, pick up objects, the soundtrack, everything was and still is insane. But it provided a template for what would become RGG and what Sega would do going forward with the Yakuza series as to what they could do with open world within a good budget. What wasn't necessarily essential within those open worlds from their point of view. Now, lots of other studios will develop open worlds that have more voiced NPCs and things like that, for example. But Sega have looked at it and gone, right, what do we feel in an open world game is essential? So you've got your combat system, you've got your ability to move around, you've got your mini games, just as those examples. They've gone, right, we need them. But when they're going, right, so what don't we need? Do you need to pick up every object or not? Yes or no? Sega have gone, nah, probably not. Does every NPC need to be voiced? Nah, no, we don't need that, so they've got rid of that. So then you've got cost implications there that are going down and down and down. So it's told them what is useful, what isn't useful, and then they start building worlds on that side of things, and then you make improvements through the iterations as you go through. Now, there will be some people out there who view that as a step back, and I can completely understand it. But at the same time, what it has allowed Sega to do is build a successful franchise slowly in terms of the Yakuza Like a Dragon series. They had a little bit of luck with Yakuza 0, but it was a bloody good game, so it deserved its luck. And it carries far less risk than Shenmue. The asset reuse, cutting out what some people would call the open world fluff, I guess, in terms of the NPCs and costings there. You just bring those costs down. You manage that budget better. You focus that development better, potentially. And therefore, it becomes a far less risky project. But, and this now comes into, I guess, my final thoughts on this. With all that in mind, without Shenmue, when does Sega learn these things? Does it learn them later on? Does it then impact what Yakuza may have ended up being, even if it was within inception at that point in time as well? Who knows? But also, my big question and what I want to ask and what I think is that actually the investment Sega made in Shenmue at that time and the lessons they picked up in terms of how they should manage these projects, how teams should work, budget management, and the templates for future games going forward, that initial investment has actually paid off massively in terms of the way they work now. And actually Shenmue's had a lot of influence on how Western developers make video games now. So again, it's that impact there is huge. But from a financial standpoint, you look at it and go, well, the game didn't sell well, so it's a financial failure. And I accept that. But from a point of view at Sega, should it not be respected more because they've learnt the lessons back then, which have now put them in the position where they can put out those titles, they know what they do, and they've learnt from those mistakes, they've learnt from the things they did well there. And actually Shenmue should be respected more in some aspects from Sega, because without those lessons, do they then get to the position they are in today after everything happened with them coming out of the console market and everything else and them having to rebuild themselves as a third-party publisher? Does that happen without the lessons from Shenmue? I'm not so sure. But guys, what do you think? Should Sega give it more respect based on the lessons they may have learnt from the development of the Shenmue series as a whole? Let me know in the comments below, guys, and I'll pick some up. As always, thank you for dropping in on the content. For £2 a month, you can be a member and get all the videos ahead of time. Otherwise, it just goes to the scheduling system as normal. All the money goes to site running costs and competitions that James and I incur. Like, share, subscribe to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and all the places you can find us. And I will be back with a video in the not too distant future. For now, guys, take care and have a good one.